After firing a head coach for the first time in franchise history, team president Kevin Warren and general manager Ryan Poles came out to right the ship and set the stage moving forward. And they didn't exactly instill a ton of confidence in the direction of the organization, with some interesting power dynamics and body language at play.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. On the show today, we bring you the biggest moments from a big press conference. Ryan Poles and Kevin Warren don't normally meet with the media and the public during the season, but an historic time in franchise history means an unprecedented press conference at that time as well. And I think we were looking for Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles to come out and sort of just calm everything down and say, hey, man, listen, like, stuff's crazy right now, but we're going to get this right. And that's what they said, but the delivery wasn't exactly what Chicago Bears fans were looking for here. And I think their press conference left not that it was embarrassing per se, but it just wasn't the kind of like rallying the troops that you would have hoped it would be from the leaders at the top of your organization. So we'll talk about where Ryan Poles will have final say on the head coaching search, but definitely feels like he was the kid in trouble at the press conference. He was in the doghouse. The power dynamics and the body language was weird between the GM and the team president. We'll also talk about how they handled it with Matt Eberflus and how that doesn't necessarily inspire a ton of confidence. And then I also want to go through where silence said a lot in this press conference. Not the words they said, but the words they didn't say and the amount of time it took to say some words. After one particular question got Ryan Poles pausing for quite an extended period of time. But I think the big news that came out of the press conference was trying to hammer down on who's going to have the final say. We've seen some reporting that, Kevin Warren has taken the reins and he's going to be the one in charge of the head coaching search. Kevin Warren comes out and says, no, Ryan Poles will be the point person on the search, but we're going to work very, very closely together. We're going to talk every day and we're going to be really, hip to hip throughout this whole process. But Ryan Poles is the point person. Well, okay, what does that mean? Yes, he's the general manager. So does that mean he's fully in charge of it and Warren's just a sounding board, or do they have like 50-50 say in who the next head coach is going to be? And if they're split, who's going to have the truly like last word, final say that, push comes to shove, who makes that final decision? It took some teeth pulling to get a clear answer out of Kevin Warren at the end of this clip here.
Kevin, who will have final say over the head coaching hire?
One of the things, again, we're focused on is final say was doing what's right for the best interests of the Chicago Bears. So I'm confident. I've never been concerned about, final say or whatever. Ryan, he's general manager. He leads our football operation. He'll serve as the point person. We will be in contact, just like we were over the last 72 hours, in contact hours a day. We will spend multiple hours a day until we make this hire. So from a final say standpoint, ultimately he's the general manager, but I think in working together, it'll be very clear who's the right person for the Chicago Bears.
What if you guys have dissenting opinions when it comes down to two people who someone's got to make that call?
We'll work that out. Yes, and again, Ryan he's the general manager. He's head of football operations, and so he will have the final say if it ever got to that point. But I'm confident that we will work through it, because the good thing about it, so long as we keep the center of our decisions what's in the best interest of the Chicago Bears, our players, as we go forward, it will become clear as far as who is the person should lead this franchise from a football standpoint, from a coaching standpoint.
on the one hand, I'm glad that Kevin Warren did actually answer the question and say, yeah, okay, if push comes to shove, it's Poles. And I also give him credit. Like, I like that he kept referring to Ryan Poles as, being in charge of football operations. Like, I think it's important for Kevin Warren to make that distinction that, like, yes, Warren is going to have a lot of influence on all of this. He's the team president. He's Ryan Poles' boss. But I think by continually putting the word football operations on Ryan Poles there a few different times, it's his way of sort of signaling like, hey, I know I'm not the quote-unquote football guy in this process. He's the team president. He's the leadership guy, the business guy, the management type culture guy, but not so much the X's and O's football side of it. And his ability to recognize that and not pretend like he's the genius who knows it all and can, make football decisions for the team too. I think there's some encouraging parts of the process there. But I also left that answer in that press conference feeling like you weren't getting super clear, confident communication. Hey, this is how it's going to go. This is our plan. This is our directive. There's a lot of words there that he was saying, a lot of talking around, a lot of kind of corporate-y, synergy, buzzwordy kind of conversation there that just, it doesn't feel like tight-knit, well planned out, well thought out, like, boom, hey, we've got a plan. This is what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to execute it. And here's the 4 steps we're going to take to get there. And there's no other question. He's just like, listen, we're going to do what's best for the team. And as long as we do what's best for the team, then everything's going to be good and everything's going to be best. And it's like, well, yes, Kevin, but people are going to have different ideas of what best for the team means. That's not an objective. What's best for the team is everyone's going to have a different opinion on what's best for the team. So when your plan is, hey, we're going to do what's best for the team, that doesn't feel like it's super well defined in a way that we can be confident in. Like, again, it could just kind of comes back to like what everyone's opinions are on what's best for the team as opposed to some objective measurement that they're looking to lean on. Not that there's a perfect objective measurement, but just sometimes you can have measurement criteria and tools and stuff. Like, but instead it's just like, hey, we're going to do what's best for the team and that's going to guide us. But that's not a very specific guide. It's a very vague guide. Every coaching search the Bears have ever done has been focused on finding what's best for the team. So what's going to make this different? How are you going to get what's best for the team? Like Kevin Warren in particular couldn't clearly communicate how they're going to do this well. It was a lot of talking around and a lot of what ends up being like, trust us because we're in charge. So we're going to do the best that we can. And like, we want more than that. And that's why I feel like the press conference was not a disaster. It wasn't embarrassing. It just wasn't particularly inspiring. It didn't give you a ton of confidence of like, oh, right, they've got this under wraps and they've got this figured out and they're going to send this in the right direction, especially because your general manager, Ryan Poles, has a totally different demeanor in that press conference. I mean, Kevin Warren's taking the lead. He's taking charge. He's running the whole show. And Ryan Poles is sitting there. He's kind of sitting. He's kind of small. And for a big former offensive lineman, like he physically is taking up less space. He's kind of looking down a lot, kind of, rubbing his tongue in his mouth a lot. He's just kind of like, not fidgety, but, he wasn't sitting up there with the kind of confidence that we've seen him have, after making draft picks or after making a big trade, that he's really confident in the Montez Sweat trade or the Caleb Williams draft pick where he gets up there and he can command a room a little bit. But in this he was second fiddle, and when you watch the video of it, like it feels like a kid who's with their parent and the kid is in trouble and the parent is like standing up for him or whatever, and he's kind of just like, I don't know, just the energy, the demeanor, the body language, the vibes were just off there. And it was very much the Kevin Warren show. And that's where I was looking for a little bit more confidence in how this process was going to go, because they didn't handle the process of firing Matt Eberflus very well. The timing, the press conference, the whole 9 yards just was not handled properly. And I want to go through where credit to Kevin Warren for admitting some mistakes on that, but not having a ton of confidence then in how this is going to keep going if this is how they're getting started here. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks, the better way to play daily fantasy sports, because Prize Picks puts you in complete control. Unlike the other daily fantasy platforms where you're trying to set a lineup and compete with your lineup against 500 other lineups, and if you don't get your picks, if your lineup doesn't fit the top 5 and out of the 500, you're not going to win anything. But with Prize Picks, it's just you versus the projections available. They set stats for players in your games, and you decide whether those players will do more or less than their Prize Picks projections. And if you get your picks right on at least 2 players, you can win up to 100 times your money. So, 230.5 passing yards for Caleb Williams against San Francisco this week. You can also pick DJ Moore, 60.5 receiving yards. Keenan Allen, 56.5. You pick more or less on your Prize Picks, you can win money instantly. Download the Prize Picks app and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. So even if your $5 lineup is wrong, you're still getting $50 with our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at Prize Picks. Run your game. The Bears didn't handle the firing of Matt Eberflus well from an optics, PR, public relations, timing standpoint whatsoever. And as a whole, then, that doesn't give me a ton of confidence in how this front office is managing these types of situations so far. And obviously, a full offseason head coaching search is a lot different of a process than, hey, the game ends on Thursday and you got to make a decision in the next 24 hours what you're going to do with your head coach and having to kind of rush through that. And it's understandable that you might make some mistakes or might not handle it perfectly in this situation. But at the same time, it shouldn't be a huge surprise to the Bears. Like, they should have been, it wasn't like they blew the game against the Lions and then all of a sudden, oh, wait a minute, maybe we should consider a coaching change. They should have been considering a coaching change all along, and then it shouldn't have had to been such a scramble to make that decision at the last minute, after the game actually happens. But what it does is you have Matt Eberflus, who, not that Matt Eberflus deserves a ton of our sympathy or whatever, but like, they did him dirty. I mean, they did it poorly for Matt Eberflus. They made him go out there and have a press conference and look like a fool when he said, yeah, I'm confident I'll coach the next game. And then a couple hours later, he's absolutely fired. And that was in no way Matt Eberflus's fault, because they hadn't told him whether they were going to fire him or not. They had given him no indication. They were meeting about his job while he was giving that press conference. And that's absolutely public relations and just employee relations, human relations, malpractice by this Bears organization. That there were so many different steps along the way that they could have handled this differently, so that you don't have a coach going out and meeting with the media and being totally misled or just misunderstand what his future was going to be and have to do a press conference like it's embarrassing for Matt Eberflus, and it's embarrassing for the Chicago Bears as an organization. And it sends a message to every head coaching candidate that you're going to interview that, like, hey, if we end up firing you, we might have you still do a press conference because we can't make the decision quickly or efficiently enough to make you to save some of that grief. Kevin Warren, in his defense, he makes a good point when he says, hey, like, we don't want to rush the decision. And so we're not just going to do it quick to get it over quick and make a decision and feel like, we just had to rush it because we had to get it done by the time the press conference happened. But I think that misses some of the point of like how you could have handled this better. So I want to start here first with what Kevin Warren said. He was asked about, like, hey, like, that looked really bad. Do you have any regrets about how this goes? And to his credit, he takes the blame there and says, yeah, probably should have done that differently. But man, you don't want to start out the head coaching turnover process, the changing of a head coach process from firing to hiring. You don't want to start that off with a, oops, my bad, we made a mistake on your very first step in this process. It's not a good start.
Your decision to fire him came after Matt came out and spoke to the media. Are you aware of the way that was perceived around the league, and why do it that way if it would come with that kind of blowback?
Yeah, because I can tell you this, when Coach Eberflus had his press conference, we had not made a final decision. And I think you know me, I think you know Ryan, I think you know George McCaskey, and I think you know the McCaskey family. If one thing we stand for is family and integrity and doing it the right way. In retrospect, could we have done it better? Absolutely. And I'll be the first one to raise my hand, yes. But during his press conference and even a couple hours later, we had not reached a decision. But on the flip side of it, something that was important to us is that once we reached the decision, we wanted to make sure to talk with Matt about that so he could have the respect to be able to call his family. And I'll say this, one thing that happened, this is the first time, and it happens around the league a lot, where a head coach will find out he's terminated, and he finds out before he's told from the organization, and that's something that we promised that we weren't going to do. So in retrospect, could we have done better? Yes. But we were trying to be respectful, and we did not know our decision when he started his press conference.
He can take credit for being able to tell Eberflus before it leaked out to NFL insiders and all that stuff. And like, that's not nothing, but it's weird to take credit for that while taking direct criticism for the other ways you so poorly handled it. Like, okay, yeah, you don't want the coach to find out from outside of the organization before he finds out from within the organization. And that does matter, but like, man, it just doesn't feel like a great vote of confidence for these guys that they couldn't figure out a better way to go about this process. Because think about, like, okay, Bears game against the Lions on Thanksgiving was it 11 a.m. or 11:30 the kickoff was? Game ends about 2:30-ish, 3 o'clock-ish. You know, they have post-game press conference, all that stuff. Okay, you now have all of Thursday to meet and discuss and think about it. And even if you want to go to bed Thursday night and wake up Friday after a night of sleep and talk about it some more, that's fine. But you know this press conference is scheduled till 9 a.m. Evidently, they started meeting about it at about 7:30. Maybe you should have started the meeting a little bit earlier to get away from the press conference. Like that's what I mean. There's a lot of steps along the way where the Bears could have handled this better. One, you could have made the decision sooner before the press conference. You could have started the meeting earlier on Friday morning. If you didn't want to make the decision on Thanksgiving, on Thursday, on the holiday, that's fine. You could make that decision then. You could also have been having these conversations in the days and weeks leading up to the Lions game. That we know it's been reported Ryan Poles wanted to fire Matt Eberflus after the Patriots loss. It's been 3 weeks since then. So clearly the general manager has been having these conversations. I would imagine the team president's been having those conversations with the general manager, and that like the McCaskies have to be in on that conversation at some point. Like how you have to then have, if they started meeting at 7:30 the morning of the firing, and they're in there, the firing comes at like 11:30 as the news comes out. They were at least in the meeting during the press conference. It takes you another 3 or 4 hours of meeting Friday morning after all that to come to a decision. Like you'd think the organization could be a little bit ahead of that, where they meet and say, okay, listen, we talked about this and look at how bad this was. Are we ready to pull the trigger? We don't need to debate this for 4 more hours. You should have been talking about it for weeks and weeks and weeks. Or you move the press conference well enough in advance that no one really notices it's moved. Right? The Bears played a Thursday game against the Lions at 11:30 a.m. It's a weird week and a weird schedule all week. Not even a regular Thursday night schedule, but an earlier on Thursday type of week. And so you after that Thursday game, you could have said, hey, we're going to have a meeting about Matt Eberflus' job security. Let's make sure we don't schedule the normal 9 a.m. press conference. Right? It's not as though, you know, everyone leaves that game on Thursday going, ooh, can't wait till the 9 a.m. press conference tomorrow. Like the Bears kind of come out and confirm on Thursday that, hey, Matt Eberflus is scheduled for a press conference tomorrow, right? It would have been easy enough to take it off the schedule altogether, or at least postpone the press conference till later on Friday and use the Thanksgiving holiday as the whole excuse there. Oh, we put this because of the Thursday game, because it was an early Thursday game, because it was a holiday. Hey, we're not going to do the 9 a.m. press conference. We're going to push that back and do it Friday afternoon or even Saturday morning, like whatever. It didn't have to be, we're postponing this press conference while we decide what we're going to do with Matt Eberflus, because that's another like PR disaster and sends a bad message and all. That would be another form of a mistake. But there were so many different ways you could have gone about either making the decision before the press conference or moving the press conference so you had more time to make the decision, and just handled the whole thing better so that you looked like an organization that is very deliberate and intentional, instead of having kind of last minute meetings on a holiday morning trying to figure out if we're going to fire a guy that you've been wanting to fire for weeks and weeks and weeks. Like that's where it feels a little bit dysfunctional. And again, if your first step in the coaching change process is dysfunctional, then it's a little bit hard to have confidence that any of the next steps are going to be that much more functional. Or are we going to end up with another failed head coaching search that produces a candidate that's here for another 2 or 3 years? And, you know, then you clean house again, we restart over again. We have the same press conference about needing a leader of men, and we want to win, and we want to do what's best for the Chicago Bears, with the inability to do what's best for the Chicago Bears. Those were the big takeaways for me from this press conference. But there was another moment here where it wasn't what they said, but it was what they didn't say. Particularly Ryan Poles had the longest awkward silence in a Bears press conference I've seen in quite some time. And I want to listen closely to what he says to try and make a sense of where the tension was there next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And FanDuel wants to jumpstart your winning right now because new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So if you want to bet on this Bears 49ers game, the Bears are 3.5-point underdogs on the road. The upset money line would be plus 176, and the over-under is set at 44.5 points. You want to bet on that game or college football, college basketball, NBA, tennis, soccer, combat sports, you name it, they've got it all on FanDuel. A $5 bet, if you hit that first $5 bet, you're going to get $150 in bonus bets. You can even place live bets. If you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out all the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Kevin Warren, mostly, and Ryan Poles, some, said plenty during the press conference on Monday, but one of the moments that stood out for me from the press conference was when they weren't saying anything. It was particularly uncomfortable, and it was the silence that ended up speaking a bit louder than the words that he had been saying up to that point. And then I think he gave a little bit of a vague answer, but I do think it does, when you combine that with the context of holy moly, that was a long silence, and then kind of take the words he said, you can kind of piece together maybe just how bad things were. So Ryan Poles was specifically asked, this was actually the last question of the press conference, so it wasn't like he caught him off guard or he wasn't warmed up or wasn't expecting to answer a question. But was asked, Ryan, what went wrong with Shane Waldren? Why you hired Shane Waldren instead of Thomas Brown, and then Thomas Brown looks really great. Like what went wrong with Shane Waldren here? And from the moment the question ends to Ryan Poles saying his first words in an answer, I counted 11 seconds of silence. And to be fair, he says the word at the very beginning, but if you include that, like from the moment the question ends to the moment he actually starts answering the question, isn't an answer, it's a filler. But when he actually starts talking and saying words in a sentence, I counted 11 seconds of just sitting there. And it's not, it's not complete silence, so I'm glad this works in the audio medium as well, but I want you to sort of hear the wheels turning in Ryan Poles' head as he tries to figure out the diplomatic way to answer this question.
Ryan, where do you feel like it went wrong in the selection of Shane Waldren?
It's with Shane, obviously there was some communication that probably didn't happen as clean as it needed to be. And we just got off to a tough start. It's always difficult when you have a young quarterback. We built this to have support around Caleb. But when you have that blend of a young rookie quarterback with experienced players, to make that all work, it's a difficult task. And I think there was a little bit of a struggle just getting that going.
So we've heard this word communication thrown around a lot about Shane Waldren and sort of the difference and improvement that Thomas Brown makes when he comes in and takes over as offensive coordinator, improving the communication in that regard. But I think when you sort of combine that amount of silence and the sort of thinking through it in Ryan Poles' head, he's being careful not to say the wrong thing there, right? It's not that he didn't know what was wrong with Shane Waldren. It was that he didn't know how to say it in a way that wasn't going to completely throw Shane Waldren all the way under the bus and, kind of bash him. You don't want to come out and say this guy was an idiot or whatever. Like, you want to try and soften it as much as possible. But Ryan Poles doesn't usually need 10, 11, 12 seconds to soften it. Usually he can kind of say, yeah, but this was one that indicates to me it needed some extra softening. And I think the context he adds to that, right, when he says, when you have a blend of a young rookie quarterback with experienced players, to make that all work is a difficult task. And that, the communication didn't happen as clean as it needed to be. It feels to me like it's a misreading of the quarterback there. The Bears came out right away and put everything on Caleb Williams' shoulders and treated him like a veteran quarterback from the beginning. And there's merit and value to doing some of that in some ways, but I think we've seen that the lack of guide rails and structure that they gave Caleb Williams, or what they didn't give Caleb Williams in this regard, ended up hurting this offense. That they expected him to operate everything like a veteran, and he operated things better than you would expect a rookie quarterback. He was advanced for a rookie quarterback, but to not have at least, guide rails in place, to have, we've heard that Caleb Williams' drop back passes didn't have a specific number of footsteps for his drop back. You think about a 3-step drop, a 5-step drop, a 7-step drop. That plays from Shane Waldren, he didn't tell Caleb, hey, this play should always be 3 steps. This play should always be 5 steps. This play should always be 7. It's sort of a, hey, you're a big boy. However many steps you need. You can do it. Go for it. And in some ways, that's trying to empower the quarterback and saying hey, we're not going to try and confine you in such a regimented system in that regard. But then sometimes when the offense needs to get in rhythm, you need a little bit of that, right? It doesn't have to be full on bubble wrap and training wheels to make sure that nothing happens to Caleb, but you got to give him some kind of direction there. And I think there just wasn't nearly enough of that communication. I think, okay, we got a bunch of veteran players in this offense. Let's run a veteran offense. And Caleb couldn't quite do all of that because no rookie quarterback can come in and be expected to just be a veteran quarterback already. You just need experience and reps and to go through that process with all those players. And I think Waldron didn't do a good job of working through that with Caleb and then keeping the receivers abreast of that on the same page about how they're going to handle and operate those stuff. They kind of just were a little bit too loosey-goosey with it. And Thomas Brown could come in and say, all right, on this play, we've got this option. If you get a blitz, you can throw here. If you get, if you got time, you can go here. You have a double move there. He's not coming in and telling Caleb Williams, here's exactly what you got to do. But he's like, hey, here's your options. Here's your plan. And I trust you to execute that plan and decide what's going to be the right thing on that play. But I'm telling you where the bounds are here. That's where the guide rails are. It doesn't mean you're going to be leaning on the guide rail for every step, but you kind of know what space you're working within in the structure of a play, in the structure of the offense. And that's how you get a little bit more of an identity around it instead of just leaning on your quarterback to be a veteran and to sort of carry things around that way. That's what I think Matt Eberflus Ryan Poles is kind of getting at there with Waldron. And I also think the pause there is a strong indication of Waldron was Eberflus's guy, not mine. What went wrong with Shane Waldron? The guy that hired him, that would be what went wrong with Shane Waldron. And that I think that's part of Ryan Poles' brain thinking man, that wouldn't have been necessarily who I would have picked as OC, but I let my head coach decide and it was the wrong decision. And maybe he feels like he would have picked Thomas Brown or something but didn't want to come out and say that, and be like, man, I would have, because that's just throwing dirt on the grave of Eberflus and Waldron, and they already handled the Eberflus thing poorly, so you don't want to make that worse. But I think it also just kind of adds to some of the demeanor and just, I don't want to say timidness of Ryan Poles in this process and in this press conference, but man, he's just not coming out there confident, ripping and just saying, yeah, you know what? We got the wrong guy, and we wish. He could come out and answer that question with a little bit more juice behind it, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case there. The good thing was that we got plenty of juice from Thomas Brown's press conference on Monday as well, and I want to go through some of that on tomorrow's podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Warren and Poles didn't do great today, but Thomas Brown absolutely knocked it out of the park, and I want to kind of look at what the rest of the season is going to look like for him. So come on back tomorrow, make Locked On Bears your first listen again tomorrow, and in exchange, you always get to leave the podcast with another opportunity to bear down.